Welcome to BYOFAQ, the unofficial FAQ for the workplace.
Today's question: why does one coworker drive you up the wall and another one just gets you? The answer is 4 letters, and by the end of this, you'll know which one is you and how to work with the other 3.
But before we jump into the deep dive today, we need to do a quick disclaimer. So BYOFAQ provides general educational commentary on workplace behavior. We are not affiliated with or endorsed by any commercial behavioral assessment provider. This is strictly about the psychological mechanics of how we work together.
Right, exactly. Because we've pulled together quite a bit of behavioral psychology research, corporate case studies, and literally dozens of team-building post-mortems, we're trying to figure out how cognitive diversity actually plays out in the office. Which brings us to the hook for today's discussion. As we unpack all this, there is one question you, the listener, need to hold in your head the entire time. Which one are you?
Yeah, you'll definitely recognize yourself.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to map out 4 distinct behavioral profiles, and I guarantee you'll spot your own default setting. And you will definitely recognize the people who drive you completely crazy.
Yeah, that's usually the easiest part. But to do that, we need a blueprint, right? We can't just throw abstract theories at you. We're talking about the DISC framework. That's D-I-S-C, but we just pronounce it DISC.
Right.
The letters stand for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. But let's skip the basic 101 stuff. We are not talking about how people act at a Tuesday morning team breakfast when everyone's got their coffee and is being super polite.
No, the masks are firmly on for that.
Exactly. We're looking at stress-induced behavioral regression. We want to know what happens to a team at 4:00 p.m. on a Friday. A massive product launch fails, the servers completely crash, and your biggest client is, screaming on the phone for an explanation.
That is the perfect scenario, because that is exactly what the DISC framework is actually designed to measure. I mean, it's a behavioral snapshot. It is not some permanent verdict on a person's soul. It captures how people operate under intense pressure. And just to give 2 sentences of history here so we know what we're looking at. It's a late 1920s framework, commercialized later, and is now common in workplaces everywhere.
Period. That's all the history we need.
Right, that's the whole history lesson. The real value is understanding the cognitive mechanisms that take over when the heat gets turned up.
Right. When that server crashes on Friday afternoon, your team doesn't just randomly panic. They panic in 4 very predictable, distinct directions. So let's start with the loudest profile in the room under pressure, the D dominance. We're just going to call this type the commander.
Yeah, the commander. So this type is driven by action, results, and speed above all else. When the server goes down and everyone is freaking out, this is the person who mentally walks into a burning building and just starts barking orders.
They just take over.
They do. From a psychological standpoint, under stress, a commander's brain views ambiguity as a barrier that has to be smashed.
Yeah.
They really don't want to sit in a circle and process their feelings about the outage,
Yeah.
They want control. And they assert that control through sheer velocity.
And from an operational standpoint, that velocity is their core strength. I mean, a commander gets things moving when everyone else in the room is just paralyzed by indecision. Crisis hits, and the commander's the one saying, pull the backup server online, reroute the traffic. I don't care if it's messy, just do it.
Exactly. But that strength creates a massive, really aggressive blind spot. They steamroll people.
Oh, totally.
Because they are so intensely focused on the raw objective, they constantly mistake speed for rightness.
Right.
They skip the why entirely because they literally only care about the what and the when.
Which means they bypass team alignment completely.
Yes. And they leave this trail of absolute destruction behind them. A commander will make a unilateral decision in 5 seconds, assuming everyone naturally agrees because the logic seems so obvious to them. Then a week after the server crash, they look back and realize they alienated half the engineering department because they couldn't take 3 minutes to explain their rationale.
It's all about the objective.
Right. If we want a character anchor for this, think of Logan Roy. Unapologetic, demanding immediate results, entirely focused on the goal rather than the emotional wake he leaves behind.
Okay, so let's do a self-check for you listening. You might be a commander if you habitually finish other people's sentences in meetings because they just aren't getting to the point fast enough. If the most common feedback you get from peers is just get to the point, you're likely operating in this D territory.
Which means we really need to talk about the practical reality of working alongside them. If you have a commander for a manager or a critical peer, you have to adjust your communication register to meet their cognitive needs.
Right, so if I'm managing a commander or reporting to one, it sounds like giving them an open-ended problem is just the worst possible thing I could do. If I walk into their office during the crisis and say, hey, the server is still down, I'm just handing them ambiguity, which
I
triggers
mean,
them.
they will explode.
Right,
Yeah.
so I imagine I need to give them a menu of solutions to pick from, just so they feel in control of the momentum.
Exactly that. You never bring them just a problem. You bring options. You say, the server is down. We can either delay the launch by 2 days, or we use the backup vendor for a 10% premium. Which do you prefer? And you also have to use BLUF, B-L-U-F, bottom line upfront.
Bluff. Put the conclusion in the first sentence.
Yes. Notice how that approach directly feeds their drive for action.
Ah.
You aren't asking them to change their default psychology. You are communicating in a way that their default can actually process efficiently.
Okay, but here's the operational danger. A team of only commanders will eventually burn the building down themselves. They will run right off a cliff because nobody stopped to check a map. So if the commander brings the speed, the next type brings the social cohesion and energy to keep the team from fracturing. This is the I influence. We'll call them the entertainer.
The entertainer. They are driven by energy, by people, and by momentum. They get things done through optimism and persuasion. In a room, they are completely magnetic. Their cognitive mechanism under stress is really fascinating.
How so?
Well, while the commander seeks control through action, the entertainer's threat response is to seek social cohesion. If everyone is unified and optimistic, the threat feels neutralized to them. They rally people. They sell the vision.
Okay, wait, I got to push back here a little.
Go for it.
In our Friday afternoon server crash scenario, what good's a cheerleader? I mean, they aren't coding the fix. They're notoriously allergic to spreadsheets and administrative upkeep. Aren't they just, like, avoiding the real work by talking a big game while the rest of the team actually fixes the technical problem?
So that is a really common critique from highly analytical people, but it completely misunderstands the function they serve in a crisis. Think about the postmortems and the case studies we looked at. While the commander is barking orders and the engineers are stressing out, who is on the phone with the furious client, talking them off a ledge?
Ah, right.
Who is convincing the exhausted team to stay until 8:00 p.m. to finish the patch without quitting on the spot? The entertainer. They drive actual momentum. The best technical fix in the world fails if the client fires you before you can even implement it.
Okay, fair. I see the value in client management and internal morale. But functionally, how do you prevent them from derailing the people who actually have to execute the details?
Yeah.
Because if the entertainer overpromises to the angry client that the server will be perfectly rebuilt in an hour just to smooth things over, the technical team is going to have an absolute meltdown.
Yeah, you are pointing directly to their greatest blind spot. Entertainers notoriously overpromise. Because they prioritize social harmony and excitement, they absolutely hate meticulous detail.
They really do.
They will enthusiastically agree to an impossible deadline without once checking if the creative assets or the technical infrastructure actually exist. The character anchor here is Leslie Knope. Endless enthusiasm, deep care for the people around her, an incredible ability to mobilize a group, but entirely reliant on an underlying structure to keep her grand, spontaneous ideas from collapsing.
That tracks perfectly. They say yes to the excitement,
Yeah.
not the logistics. So for the self-check, you might be an entertainer if your calendar is just back-to-back conversations, you thrive on verbal processing, and your inbox is an absolute graveyard of, like, thousands of unread messages.
Yeah, the unread notification badge is always in the thousands. Managing an entertainer requires a very specific playbook. You have to give them the spotlight because they genuinely need to be seen and heard to feel valuable. But you must pair that spotlight with a firm, immovable deadline.
And critically, you have to put the actual details in writing. You cannot rely on a verbal agreement made in the hallway. If you pass an entertainer in the hall and agree on the server recovery protocol, they will forget it the second they walk into their next exciting conversation.
Yeah.
You have to follow up with an email that says, as discussed, here are the 3 deliverables. They just need that structural support.
Right. Now, the danger of having a commander pushing speed and an entertainer pushing hype is that the actual day-to-day operations can severely fracture. That brings us to the psychological shock absorber of the team, the third profile. The S steadiness, we call them the anchor.
The anchor. So while the commander and the entertainer make all this noise and take up all the oxygen in the room, the anchor is the quiet glue holding the entire operation together. They're driven by stability, harmony, and dependability. Patient, calm, and fiercely loyal.
Yes. In our server crash scenario, the anchor's cognitive response to a threat is stabilization and risk mitigation through routine. When the commander is yelling and the entertainer is spinning a dozen plates, the anchor is the person who actually sits down at the desk, opens the terminal, and quietly starts typing the recovery code.
Just doing the work.
Exactly. Their core strength is reliability.
Uh,
They provide the supportive foundation that allows the risk takers to operate at all.
but their blind spot is arguably the most insidious for a manager to deal with. Anchors actively avoid conflict. They resist sudden changes. And most dangerously, they will never tell you they're overloaded. I've seen this happen so many times in the field, and it is a massive management trap. Quiet does not mean agreement.
Oh, absolutely. Let's look at the server crisis again. The commander demands a completely new software architecture by Monday morning. The entertainer hypes up how great it will look. The anchor sits silently in the emergency meeting.
Just nodding along.
Right. And inexperienced leaders look at that silence and assume it means the anchor is on board.
Yeah.
They aren't. They just don't want to disrupt the harmony of the meeting to
Yeah.
point out all the ways this new architecture will completely break their daily workflow.
So they just absorb the stress, they take on the extra work generated by the commander's sudden pivot, and they quietly work through the entire weekend to keep the peace.
And they will absorb and absorb and absorb until they quietly break and hand in their resignation on a random Tuesday.
Yep. As a leader, you cannot rely on an anchor to volunteer their dissenting opinions. You have to actively invite their pushback.
The perfect character anchor here is Samwise Gamgee. Absolute loyalty, completely dependable, carrying the heaviest burdens without demanding the spotlight. Essential to the success of the mission. But they bear the weight internally until they physically can't take another step.
For the self-check, you might be an anchor if you are the person on the team everyone vents to. People instinctively trust you. And you'd much rather absorb a problem yourself and just fix it quietly behind the scenes than make a scene or confront a coworker publicly.
To work effectively with an anchor, you really have to respect their deep need for stability.
Which means giving them a warning before big changes.
Yeah.
If you are going to pivot a major project, do not blindside an anchor on a Tuesday morning. Pull them aside on Monday afternoon and say, hey, we might need to shift direction tomorrow. I want you to start thinking about how that impacts your workflow.
That goes a long way.
It does. You also have to ask them directly for their thoughts. You
Wow.
say, I know we just discussed this new plan, but what are we missing? What concerns do you have? You literally have to give them explicit permission to disagree.
That permission is everything for an S. Now, we have one final piece of the puzzle. The anchor is quietly typing the code to fix the server. But who checks if the code is actually correct? Who ensures the bridge won't actually collapse under our feet when we try to cross it? This is the C conscientiousness. The architect.
The architect. They are driven by accuracy, quality, and getting it right. Highly analytical, very precise, and careful. When everyone else is ready to just launch the patch and go home for the weekend, the architect is the one raising their hand to ask the highly technical question everyone else completely forgot to consider.
Right. Under pressure, an architect's brain treats ambiguity as a physical threat. Their defense mechanism is data. If they can control the variables, if they can analyze the spreadsheet, they can neutralize the threat. That's why asking them to just wing it feels like literal professional negligence to them.
It's insulting to them.
It is. Their strength is catching the error before it ships. If the commander is the general pointing at the hill they need to take, the architect is the structural engineer calculating the exact load-bearing capacity of the vehicles they need to get there.
They're the ones who save the company from disastrous, massively expensive mistakes. But the blind spot is intense analysis paralysis. I mean, their perfectionism can prevent a project from ever seeing the light of day. They also have this tendency to misread warmth or enthusiasm as fluff.
Oh, totally.
If an entertainer comes to them with a big, passionate pitch about a new marketing campaign, the architect is just sitting there with a blank expression thinking, where is the data to back up this assumption?
And that contrast between the architect's need for precision and the commander's need for speed, that is the root of so many severe workplace clashes. In our Friday server crash, the commander is screaming, "Ship the patch now, we will fix the secondary bugs on Monday." The architect flat out refuses, viewing that as reckless and irresponsible.
They just won't do it.
No. For a character anchor, consider Sherlock Holmes. Hyper-analytical, intensely focused on the minute details everyone else glosses over, and occasionally deeply frustrated by the emotional or seemingly illogical behavior of everyone around him.
So You might be an architect if you meticulously color code your project trackers. And if hearing a coworker casually say it's basically done makes your eye twitch. Because to you, a project is either entirely complete and verified or it is not done at all. There was no basically.
Working with an architect requires providing raw data and time. You cannot manage them the way you manage an entertainer. Do not try to win an architect over with a high-energy speech. Bring the documentation. Expect them to ask a dozen granular questions.
And crucially, do not rush them into a sloppy yes. If you corner an architect and demand immediate approval on a proposal, they might eventually say yes just to escape the interpersonal pressure, but they will resent you for it.
Well, they will.
And they will immediately return to their desk and start documenting all ways your plan is fundamentally flawed. Give them the space to review the information.
So we have the 4 points on the compass: the commander, the entertainer, the anchor, the architect. But here is where we must introduce the rules of the road, because understanding these profiles is only half the battle. The other half is knowing how this framework gets dangerously misunderstood and misapplied in corporate environments.
Right. The number one caveat we found across all the research is the rule of blends. Almost nobody is a pure single letter. You are not just a D or just an S. Most people are a dominant blend of 2 letters.
Right. And the intersections are where human behavior gets really complex. For example, you might be a commander who has a secondary architect streak. That is an incredibly intense combination, meaning you demand things be done immediately, but you also demand they are structurally perfect.
Good luck to that team.
Right. It creates immense internal and external pressure. Or you might be an entertainer anchor, deeply focused on both team morale and team stability, making you an incredible mediator, but entirely averse to making hard, unpopular decisions.
Right.
Furthermore, these blends shift depending on the context. You might operate as an anchor at home with your family, prioritizing peace, but default to a sharp commander when managing a crisis at work.
Treating someone as a single fixed letter, boxing them in permanently, is the most common misuse of DISC. It just ignores the reality of human behavior. But this framework is highly effective for specific operational things. It's excellent for communicating across registers, knowing when to bring bullet points to a commander and when to bring a detailed spreadsheet to an architect.
It is also incredibly useful for building teams without shared blind spots. I mean, if you build a startup team with 4 commanders, you are going to run incredibly fast in the exact wrong direction because nobody stopped to check the market data.
And if you have 4 architects, you'll build a perfect product that never actually launches.
Exactly. It is great for assessing fit, measuring the person against the environment they are currently operating in.
Which leads us to the 4 nots. The things this framework absolutely does not do. First, it is not a measure of competence or intelligence. A high C is not inherently smarter than a high I. They simply process environmental information differently. Second, it's not a deep personality test or some psychological diagnosis. It's just a behavioral snapshot of how you act under pressure.
Third, it is not a hiring filter. This is a critical error many companies make. You do not screen out resumes because you think a specific role needs a specific letter. And fourth, it is not destiny. People can, and frequently do, flex outside their natural default when the situation requires it. An anchor can learn to deliver hard news. An architect can learn to launch an imperfect product.
I really cannot emphasize enough how damaging it is when managers weaponize this tool in the office. We see people use their profile as a literal excuse for bad behavior. They say, well, I was blunt and completely rude to you in that meeting because I'm a high D. Deal with it.
Yeah, that's not behavioral science. That's just avoiding accountability.
Exactly. Or worse, a manager will label someone permanently, saying, oh, we can't give her that complex operational project. She's an I. She won't handle the details.
Which is exactly the wrong way to apply this knowledge. The real value is understanding someone's default setting under pressure so you can meet them where they are, rather than demanding they act exactly like you. It is entirely about fit, not fault. If a project is failing, it's rarely because someone is intentionally sabotaging it. It is usually because their behavioral default is clashing with the operational needs of the moment. By understanding these 4 letters, you replace blind frustration with strategy.
Before we wrap this up, there's one highly provocative thought that emerged from the recent case studies we reviewed for this deep dive. And it has to do with how the modern workplace is fundamentally changing. We are moving rapidly toward remote, asynchronous work environments.
Yes, and the implications for these 4 profiles are massive. Think about it. Remote work strips away the physical cues of the office. It relies heavily on written, data-driven communication via Slack or email. which heavily favors the architect. And it relies on direct, explicit commands and clear objectives, which heavily favors the commander.
Exactly. So what happens to the entertainer, whose entire cognitive advantage relies on reading the room, verbal persuasion, and physical momentum? And what happens to the anchor, who builds trust through quiet, consistent physical presence and loyalty? Are we accidentally designing a future of work that naturally rewards commanders and architects while leaving entertainers and anchors completely isolated? It changes the entire dynamic of how these letters interact.
It's a fascinating structural shift, and it forces leaders to actively create space for those marginalized profiles in a digital environment. But let's bring it all back to the foundation we started with today. We have walked through the 4 profiles in plain English. We have the commander, driving action and demanding the bottom line. We have the entertainer, driving momentum and bringing the energy. We have the anchor, providing the stability and a quiet reliability that holds the team together. And we have the architect, demanding accuracy and catching the errors before they ruin the project.
We started this deep dive with one specific question. And now that you've seen the blueprint, we want to know the answer.
That's the foundation. So which one are you?
Tell us in the comments, and we'll see you next week when we go deep on the first one, the high D, the commander. That's BYOFAQ for this week.